I always knew the day would come when my daughter would finally read that letter. The one I wrote with trembling hands but a steady heart. Laura believed my silence meant forgiveness. She sat across from me for years, smiling, bringing flowers, pretending we were whole again. And I let her. I let her believe it. But forgiveness isn't something you fake. And it's certainly not something you give to someone who never truly asked for it. The moment she opened that letter, everything she thought she knew about me, about us, began to fall apart. Because that letter wasn't my goodbye. It was my truth. If this story resonates with you, don't just scroll away. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me, have you ever been hurt by someone who thought time alone could erase what they did? And where are you watching from tonight? I'd really like to know. For years, my life looked normal. That's the word Laura liked to use whenever she stepped into my house. Normal. As if saying it enough times could make it true. As if bringing a bouquet of grocery store flowers every Sunday could rewrite what had already been done. I lived in a modest one-story home just outside of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't the house I raised Laura in. That house was gone, taken quietly and legally, just like everything else she thought she deserved. This place was smaller, quieter, and in many ways more honest. Nothing in it pretended to be something it wasn't. Unlike us. Every Sunday at exactly 2:15 p.m., Laura would pull into my driveway. Always the same silver SUV. Always parked slightly crooked. Always with that same rehearsed smile waiting behind the steering wheel before she even opened the door. "Mom," she would call out softly like I might disappear if she startled me. "I'm in the kitchen," I'd answer, keeping my voice even controlled. She'd walk in carrying flowers or a small bag of groceries I didn't ask for. Sometimes it was apples, sometimes a loaf of bread. Once she brought me a scented candle that smelled like vanilla and something overly sweet like a bakery that tried too hard. "I thought you might like this," she'd say, setting it down gently, watching my reaction too closely. And I would nod. "Thank you." That was our rhythm. Polite. Careful, surface level. She never asked the questions that mattered, never said the words that might have changed everything, and I never offered them. Because silence, I learned, can be louder than any argument. We would sit across from each other at the small wooden table in my kitchen. The same table I bought at a yard sale after everything happened. It had a slight wobble if you leaned too hard on the left side, but I never fixed it. It reminded me that not everything has to be perfectly stable to still serve its purpose. Laura would talk about her life, her work, her friends, the new restaurant she tried downtown. She spoke easily, comfortably, like someone who believed she had done nothing wrong. "And Daniel got a promotion," she said one afternoon, stirring her coffee like it required all her attention. "Regional manager now. It's been a lot of responsibility, but he's handling it really well." I nodded again. "That's good." She smiled, relieved by my simple approval. Or maybe by my lack of disapproval. Daniel Bennett, her husband. The man who stood beside her the day everything fell apart and somehow convinced her it was the right thing to do. I rarely spoke his name. Sometimes Laura would hesitate just for a second, like she was about to say something more, something real. But then she would pull back, choosing comfort over honesty. "You've been doing okay, right?" she asked, once her tone softer than usual. "I manage," I replied. That word manage seemed to satisfy her. Or maybe it made her feel less guilty. I wasn't thriving, but I wasn't accusing either. I existed in a space that allowed her to keep believing in the version of herself she preferred. A good daughter. A caring daughter. A forgiven daughter. But the truth was, every time she walked into my house, I felt it. The weight of what she never acknowledged. The papers she never apologized for. The decision she never took back. The look in her eyes that day. When she chose him over me. I would watch her as she talked, noticing the small things. The way she avoided certain topics. The way her smile tightened when the conversation drifted too close to the past. The way she never once asked, "Mom, are you still hurt?" Because deep down, I think she knew the answer. She just didn't want to hear it. One afternoon, about 3 years after everything happened, she brought up something that made it all clearer than ever. "Have you thought about, long-term plans?" she asked carefully. I looked at her. "What kind of plans?" She shifted in her seat, suddenly interested in aligning the edge of her napkin. "Just your will, your finances, making sure everything is organized." There it was. Not concern, not love, control. I let a small pause settle between us before answering. "I've taken care of it." Her eyes flickered up sharp for just a moment. "Oh, good. That's good. I just worry about you, that's all." I almost smiled at that. Almost, because worry doesn't look like quiet calculations. It doesn't sound like strategic questions wrapped in gentle tones. But I didn't challenge her. I never did. Instead, I took a sip of my tea and let the silence stretch. She filled it quickly, like she always did. I just want to make sure things are simple. No confusion later. No confusion later." That was always her goal. Clean lines, clear ownership, no loose ends. Except life doesn't work that way. And neither does truth. What Laura never understood, what she never even considered, was that my silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memories I never spoke about. Full of decisions I made quietly without her knowledge. Full of a future she believed she was part of, but wasn't. Every Sunday, she came into my home thinking she was maintaining something fragile but intact. A relationship, a connection, a forgiven past. And every Sunday, I let her believe it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to confront someone. It's to let them keep believing a lie until the truth arrives on its own. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. The truth is nothing about what Laura did happened overnight. People like to believe betrayal is sudden. A sharp moment. A single bad decision that changes everything. But that's not how it works, at least not in my experience. It happens slowly, quietly. One small compromise at a time, until you look up one day and realize the person standing in front of you is no longer someone you recognize. It started the year I turned 64. I had just come home from the hospital after what the doctors politely called a minor stroke. Minor, they said, as if there's anything minor about waking up in a hospital bed and not being able to remember your own phone number. I was weak. Not just physically, but mentally too. My thoughts moved slower. Words slipped away mid-sentence. I hated that feeling, the helplessness of knowing your mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. That's when Laura stepped in. At first, she was everything a daughter should be. She stayed with me for a week, cooked my meals, organized my medications, sat beside me on the couch in the evenings holding my hand like she used to when she was little. "Don't worry, Mom," she told me softly one night. "He'll take care of everything." And I believed her. Of course I did. She was my daughter. She brought Daniel with her a few days later. Back then, I still wanted to like him. I told myself he was just practical. A man who thought in numbers and plans. Someone who could help us organize things while I recovered. "Mrs. McAllister?" he said, standing awkwardly in my living room, holding a folder too tightly. "We just want to make sure everything is secure for you." Secure. That word again. I nodded, grateful, or at least trying to be. He sat down at my dining table and opened the folder. Papers, forms, documents filled with words that felt too heavy for my tired mind to process. Just some basic things. He sat down at my dining table and opened the folder. Papers, forms, documents filled with words that felt too heavy for my tired mind to process. Just some basic things, Laura said quickly, sitting beside me. Nothing complicated. I remember looking at her face in that moment. She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I knew. There was something behind it, something tight, something rehearsed. What kind of things, I asked. Just making sure we can help you manage the house, she replied. In case anything happens again. In case anything happens. I should have asked more questions. I should have told them to leave. But I didn't. Because I was tired. Because I trusted her. Because I wanted to believe that love still meant something. Daniel pointed to a line on the paper. Right here, he said. Just a signature. My hand hesitated. For just a second. Mom, Laura said, gently, placing her hand over mine. It's just temporary. Until you're fully back on your feet. Temporary. That word stayed with me. I signed. Not once, but several times. Each signature felt like nothing in the moment. Just ink on paper. Just a daughter helping her mother through a difficult time. But those signatures changed everything. A week later, I started to feel stronger. 2 weeks later, I could walk without assistance. A month later, my mind was clear again. And that's when I began to notice the small things. The mail stopped coming in my name. The utility bills were suddenly addressed to Laura. Even the bank called once asking to confirm a recent authorization I didn't remember giving. Laura handles that now, I told them, confused but not yet alarmed. It wasn't until I tried to access my own account that the truth began to unfold. I'm sorry, ma'am, the young man at the bank said, avoiding eye contact. But you're no longer listed as the primary account holder. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? I asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen slightly toward me. There was a transfer of authority, he explained. Signed and notarized. My name was there. My signature. Clear as day. But I didn't remember signing anything like that. Not fully. Not clearly. That's when the fear crept in. Not panic. Not yet. Just a quiet, growing realization that something wasn't right. I drove home that day with shaking hands. Laura was already there when I arrived. Of course she was. Mom. You're back early, she said, standing up too quickly from the couch. I looked at her. Really looked at her. When did you take over my accounts? I asked. The room went still. Just for a second. Then she smiled. Mom, we talked about this, she said calmly. After the hospital, you said you wanted help. Help. That's not what I asked, I replied. Daniel stepped in, then his voice smooth, controlled. We're just trying to protect you, he said. You weren't in a position to manage things safely. I felt something inside me shift. Not break. Not yet. But shift. What else did I sign? I asked quietly. Laura's expression changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. That flicker of hesitation. That's everything, she said quickly. Just the accounts and some paperwork for the house. The house. My heart skipped. What paperwork? Nothing major, Daniel said. Just making sure the property is properly managed. Managed? I walked past them and went straight to the hallway closet where I kept my old files. My hands moved faster than my thoughts, pulling out folders, flipping through papers, searching for something I couldn't yet name. And then I found it. A copy. Not the original, but enough. My house. Transferred. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Completely. Signed. Dated. Notarized. I remember turning around slowly, the paper shaking in my hands. You took my house, I whispered. Laura's face crumpled, but not with guilt. With fear. Mom, please. You took my house. I repeated louder this time. Daniel stepped forward. It was necessary, he said firmly. For your protection. Protection. That word hit differently now. You did this while I was recovering, I said, my voice barely holding together. While I trusted you. Laura's eyes filled with tears. But even then, I noticed something. She wasn't apologizing. She was explaining. Mom, you don't understand, she said. We were trying to secure everything. If something happened to you, if something happened to me, I interrupted. It should have been my decision. What came next? Silence fell over the room. Heavy, unavoidable. And in that silence, I realized something I wish I had understood sooner. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. She chose this. She chose him. She chose control over me. And in that moment, standing there in what used to be my own home, holding proof of everything they had taken, I understood something else. I hadn't just lost my house. I had lost my daughter. That night, after they left, I didn't cry. I think that's what surprised me the most. I stood alone in the living room, though legally it no longer belonged to me, and I waited for the tears to come. For the anger. For something loud and uncontrollable. But instead, there was silence. A deep, heavy silence that settled into my chest like a stone. I sat down slowly on the couch and looked around the room. Every piece of furniture had a memory attached to it. The lamp in the corner, I bought it the year Laura graduated college. The framed photo on the wall, her at 8 years old, missing her front teeth, grinning like the world belonged to her. Back then, it did. Back then, I would have given her anything. And in the end, I suppose, I did. Just not the way she thinks. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Not peace, not acceptance, clarity. There's a difference. I made coffee the way I always did. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, and sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. I read every line carefully this time, every word, every clause. There it was, in plain legal language. Ownership transferred, authority reassigned, control relinquished, all with my signature. Legally, they had done nothing wrong. That was the part that stung the most, because it meant I had helped them do it. I pressed my fingers against my temple, trying to steady my thoughts. You were sick, I told myself. You trusted her. But another voice answered quietly. And she knew that. That realization cut deeper than anything else. Laura hadn't just taken advantage of the situation. She had understood it, planned around it, used it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers until the coffee in my cup went cold. Then slowly, I gathered everything back into a neat stack. If there was one thing I had always believed in, it was this: reacting emotionally never solves anything. It only gives the other person more power. And I had already given Laura enough. So instead of confronting her again, I chose something else. I chose silence. Not the helpless silence of confusion, but a deliberate one, a controlled one. The next time Laura came over 2 days later, not even waiting for Sunday, I greeted her the same way I always did. Hi, sweetheart. She looked nervous when she walked in. Her eyes searched my face, trying to read something I refused to show. Mom, are you okay? She asked carefully. I'm fine, I said, turning back to the sink as if nothing had happened. She hesitated. I've been thinking about yesterday, she continued. I know it was a lot to take in, but it's done, I interrupted quietly. She blinked. What do you mean? I mean, what's done is done, I said, drying my hands slowly. No point in going back and forth about it. For a moment, she just stared at me, confused, relieved, maybe even a little suspicious. You're not upset, she asked. I met her eyes then. There was so much I could have said in that moment, so many truths sitting right at the edge of my tongue, but I swallowed them all. I'm tired, Laura, I said simply. I don't have the energy to fight. That was the moment everything shifted. Not for me, for her. Because in her mind, my lack of resistance meant acceptance. My quiet meant agreement. My exhaustion looked like surrender. And once she believed that everything became easier for her, she smiled again. That same practiced, comfortable smile. Okay, she said softly. Okay, Mom. Well, just move forward. Move forward. I nodded. Yes, I said. Let's do that. From that day on, something changed in the way she treated me. She became lighter, more relaxed, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She started coming over more often, sometimes twice a week. She brought groceries, offered to help with small things around the house, and spoke openly about future plans. I was thinking, she said one afternoon, flipping through a magazine at my kitchen table, maybe we could renovate the backyard next spring. Open it up a little, make it more modern. Not you. We. I watched her as she spoke, her eyes bright with ideas that no longer included me the way they used to. That sounds nice, I replied. And I meant it, because the backyard would look beautiful, even if I wasn't meant to stay there. She talked about replacing the old cabinets, repainting the walls, maybe even renting out part of the property for extra income. All of it said so casually, so naturally, like she had always been the one in charge, like I had simply faded into the background. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became. She didn't see what she had done as wrong. Not truly. In her mind, she had solved a problem. She had taken control of a situation that could have become messy. She had secured her future. And if that meant taking something from me, well, she found a way to justify it. That's the thing about betrayal. It rarely looks like cruelty to the person committing it. It looks like necessity, like logic, like the right decision at the time. But I saw it for what it was. Every time she sat across from me, talking about changes to a home that used to be mine. Every time she used the word we when she really meant I. Every time she avoided mentioning that day entirely, I understood her more clearly. And I understood myself too. Because while she was moving forward, I was standing still, watching, learning, waiting. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand anything back. And that made her comfortable. Too comfortable. She stopped being careful. Stopped choosing her words so precisely. Stopped pretending even just a little. And in doing so, she gave me something far more valuable than an apology. She gave me time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to decide exactly what I was going to do next. Because one thing Laura never realized was that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means someone is preparing for something you'll never see coming. The strange thing about betrayal is once you've seen it clearly, you can't unsee it. Every smile becomes a question. Every kind gesture feels measured. And every word carries a weight it didn't have before. That's how it was with Laura after that. At first glance, nothing had changed. She still came by with her little gifts, still asked if I needed anything, still spoke in that soft, careful voice she used when she wanted to sound like a good daughter. But now I noticed everything. The pauses, the glances, the questions she asked, and more importantly, the ones she didn't. It became almost predictable. One afternoon, about a month after everything happened, she arrived earlier than usual. I heard her car pull in around noon, tires crunching lightly against the gravel driveway. I was sitting by the window, knitting something I'd taken up again, just to keep my hands busy. She knocked once, then let herself in. "Mom," she called. "In here," I replied calmly. She walked in smiling, but there was something different about her that day. Something more focused, less relaxed. "I brought lunch," she said, holding up a paper bag. "Your favorite chicken salad from Maple Street." "That's thoughtful," I said. We sat down at the table, unwrapping sandwiches in silence for a few moments. I could feel it, the tension just beneath the surface. She didn't come early for no reason. Finally, she spoke. I was thinking, she began casually, though. Her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. "Maybe we should go over some of your paperwork again, just to make sure everything's up to date." There it was again. Paperwork. I took a slow bite of my sandwich, giving myself time before answering. "I thought everything was already taken care of," I said. "It is," she replied quickly. "I just mean reviewing things, staying organized. I looked at her, really looked this time. "Is something wrong, Laura?" Her eyes flickered. "No, of course not. Daniel mentioned that sometimes people forget small details, and it's better to double-check while everything is still fresh." Daniel? Always Daniel. I set my sandwich down. "I see." She leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "We just want to make sure you're protected, Mom tales, and it's better to double-check while everything is still fresh." Daniel. Always Daniel. I set my sandwich down. "I see." She leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "We just want to make sure you're protected, Mom." Protected. The word landed heavier this time, protected from what I asked quietly. She hesitated. "From complications. Later on. That vague future she kept referencing. I nodded slowly as if I understood. But inside, something was settling into place, because this wasn't about what had already happened. This was about what they wanted next. And that realization chilled me more than anything else. "What kind of paperwork are you talking about?" I asked. "Oh, nothing major," she said quickly. "Just things like your remaining savings, maybe some adjustments to your accounts, making sure everything aligns with your current situation." My current situation. Meaning dependent, meaning vulnerable, meaning manageable. I leaned back slightly in my chair, studying her expression. "Laura," I said gently, "do you think I can't take care of myself?" Her face changed immediately. "No, that's not what I meant at all." "Then what did you mean?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I just want to help," she said finally. There it was. The same line, the same justification. But this time, I heard it differently. Because help doesn't feel like pressure. Help doesn't come with documents. Help doesn't quietly take things away while pretending to give. I gave a small nod as if I accepted her answer. "All right," I said. "We can look at things another time." Relief washed over her face instantly. "Okay," she said, smiling again. "No rush. Just whenever you're comfortable." Comfortable? I almost laughed. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up my sandwich and finished eating, letting the conversation drift into safer territory, whether neighbors, a show she had been watching. But my mind stayed focused. Because now I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. That evening, after she left, I sat alone in my living room and thought about everything she had said, about the way she had said it, about the urgency hidden beneath her calm tone. They weren't satisfied. Taking the house hadn't been enough. They wanted control of everything, every account, every dollar, every decision. And if I had stayed the woman I was a month before, they might have succeeded. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Something had changed the moment I saw those papers. Something inside me had hardened, not into bitterness, but into clarity. I stood up slowly and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room. It wasn't much, just an old wooden desk I had found at a thrift store, but it held the few things that still belonged entirely to me. Inside the top drawer, I kept a small notebook. I pulled it out and opened to a blank page. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I picked up a pen. If Laura and Daniel were planning their next move, then it was time I started planning mine. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. Because there's a moment in every story like this, a quiet turning point, where the person who has been watching stops simply observing and begins to act. I wrote one name at the top of the page: Michael Lawson. I had heard of him years ago, a lawyer known for being thorough, careful, and most importantly, impossible to manipulate. At the time, I never thought I would need someone like him. But now I understood something I hadn't before. Trust is a beautiful thing until it's broken. And once it is, you don't rebuild it with the same people. You build something stronger, something protected, something they can't touch. I closed the notebook and set it down carefully. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. Because while Laura believed she was securing her future, she had no idea. She had just given me the reason to take mine back. I didn't call Michael Lawson right away. That might sound strange considering I had already written his name down like some kind of lifeline. But I've learned something over the years. When you've been blindsided, once you don't rush your next move, you slow down. You observe. You make sure you understand exactly who you're dealing with before you decide how to respond. So I waited, not passively, carefully. Over the next couple of weeks, I let Laura continue exactly as she had been. I didn't change my routine. I didn't confront her again. I didn't ask questions that might make her cautious. If anything, I became easier, softer, more agreeable, and that made her more confident. That's the thing about people who believe they're in control. They relax. They stop watching as closely. They assume the outcome is already decided, and that's when they start revealing themselves. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw it clearly for the first time. Laura had come by unannounced again, carrying a folder this time instead of groceries. That alone told me everything I needed to know. "Mom," she said brightly, stepping inside. "I thought we could go over a few things today. Nothing serious, just some updates." "Updates?" I smiled gently. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." We sat at the kitchen table just like always. She placed the folder in front of her, her fingers resting on it like she was waiting for the right moment to open it. But she didn't rush. She made small talk first. About the weather, about a neighbor she barely knew, about a sale at some store I hadn't been to in years. And I let her. Because this wasn't about conversation. This was about timing. Eventually, she opened the folder. Inside were more documents. Of course there were. I just want to make sure everything is aligned moving forward, she said, her voice calm but purposeful. Since things have changed, it's important we stay organized. I just want to make sure everything is aligned moving forward, she said, her voice calm but purposeful. Since things have changed, it's important we stay organized. That word again. I leaned slightly forward as if interested. What kind of changes? Well, she said, flipping through the pages. There are still a few accounts in your name. Small ones, nothing major. But it would be easier if everything was consolidated. Consolidated? I nodded slowly. And how would that work? She pointed to a section on the paper. It's just a matter of authorizing me to manage those accounts as well. That way, if anything happens, I repeated softly. She paused just for a second. Then she smiled. It's just a precaution. Precaution. I looked down at the papers, not really reading them, just letting my gaze move across the lines as if I were considering it. But inside, everything was becoming clearer. This wasn't about helping me anymore. This was about eliminating every piece of independence I had left, one account at a time, one signature at a time, until there was nothing left that belonged to me. I picked up the pen she had placed beside the documents, and for a moment, I let her believe I was going to sign. I saw it in her eyes, that flicker of anticipation, that quiet relief. But instead, I set the pen back down. Not today, I said gently. Her expression froze. What do you mean? I continued calmly. I'd like to take some time to look over everything properly. She blinked. Mom, it's really just standard, I know, I said, still smiling. But I'd feel better if I reviewed it on my own first. There was a silence then, not long, but enough. Enough for me to see the shift, the subtle tightening in her jaw, the way her fingers pressed slightly harder against the edge of the table. She wasn't used to resistance. Not anymore. Of course, she said finally, her voice a little too controlled. Take your time. But I could hear it, the impatience beneath the politeness, the frustration she was trying to hide. I closed the folder gently and slid it back toward her. I'll let you know, I added. She nodded, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes this time. Okay, she said. She left shortly after that. No extra conversation, no lingering, just a quick goodbye and the sound of her car pulling away a little faster than usual. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, not moving, not thinking, just a quick goodbye and the sound of her car pulling away a little faster than usual. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, not moving, not thinking, just feeling, because that moment confirmed something I had been quietly suspecting. This wasn't just about what they had already taken. They were still trying, still pushing, still assuming they could get more. And more importantly, they believed I wouldn't stop them. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me certain that I couldn't afford to wait any longer. That evening, I picked up the phone. My hand didn't shake this time. I dialed the number I had written down days earlier. It rang twice. Lawson and Associates, a woman's voice answered. How may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Michael Lawson, I said. There was a brief pause. May I ask who's calling? Rose McAllister. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Please hold, Miss McAllister. Soft music filled the line. For a moment, I closed my eyes. This was it. The moment everything shifted from observation to action. Miss McAllister, a man's voice came on the line. Calm, steady, professional. Yes. Soft music filled the line. For a moment, I closed my eyes. This was it. The moment everything shifted from observation to action. "Miss McAllister," a man's voice came on the line. "Calm, steady, professional." "Yes, this is Michael Lawson. How can I help you?" I took a breath. And for the first time since everything began, I said it out loud. "My daughter took my house," I said quietly. "And I think she's trying to take everything else." There was no shock in his voice, no hesitation, just a simple, measured response. "Then I think it's time we talk," he said. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. Because Laura may have believed she had already won. But she had made one critical mistake. She thought I was still the same woman who signed those papers without understanding them. She thought I was still weak, still trusting, still unaware. But she was wrong. And soon, she was going to find out just how wrong she had been. I met Michael Lawson 3 days later. His office was nothing like I expected. No flashy DCOR, no intimidating marble floors or walls covered in framed degrees meant to impress. Just a quiet, orderly space that felt deliberate, like every object had a purpose and nothing was there by accident. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a calm expression. "Ms. McAllister," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat." I sat down slowly, taking in the room, but mostly taking in him. He wasn't the kind of man who wasted words. I could tell that immediately. "Tell me everything," he said. And so I did. Not just the paperwork, not just the house, but everything. The stroke, the signatures, the way Laura had smiled while guiding my hand across documents I barely understood. The slow realization, the bank, the confrontation, and then the silence. He didn't interrupt me, not once. He just listened, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his eyes steady. When I finished, the room felt heavier somehow. Not with confusion, but with truth. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "What your daughter and her husband did," he said carefully, "was legally structured but ethically questionable." I let out a quiet breath. "I figured as much." He nodded. "The challenge in cases like this is proving undue influence or lack of capacity at the time of signing." "I wasn't myself," I said. "I know that now." "I believe you," he replied. "But belief isn't enough in court. We would need documentation, medical records, witnesses, evidence that you were not in a position to fully were not in a position to fully understand what you were signing." I looked down at my hands. "I don't know if I have all that." He studied me for a moment. "Even if we don't pursue reversing the transfer," he continued, "that doesn't mean you're without options." "Understand what you were signing." I looked down at my hands. "I don't know if I have all that." He studied me for a moment. "Even if we don't pursue reversing the transfer," he continued, "that doesn't mean you're without options." That caught my attention. "What kind of options?" He leaned forward slightly. "Protection," he said simply. That word again. But this time, it felt different. "Everything you have left, your accounts, your assets, any future decisions, we can secure them in a way that prevents anyone from taking advantage of you again." I nodded slowly. "And my daughter?" He didn't hesitate. "If you choose, she can be completely excluded from any control or benefit moving forward." There it was. Clear, direct, no softness, no emotional cushioning, just the truth. I sat with that for a moment. "Would she be notified?" I asked. "Not immediately," he said. But any changes to your estate or financial structure would become evident over time, especially if she's expecting access. I sat with that for a moment. Would she be notified? I asked. Not immediately, he said, but any changes to your estate or financial structure would become evident over time, especially if she's expecting access. Expecting. Yes, that was the word. Laura wasn't asking anymore. She was expecting. I want to make sure she can't touch anything else, I said quietly. Michael nodded. Then we start there. He pulled a legal pad toward him and began outlining steps. First, we'll review every account currently in your name. Then, we'll transfer control into a protected structure, something like a trust. A trust, I repeated. Yes, it allows you to maintain control while clearly defining who has access and under what conditions. And she wouldn't have any, only if you decide she should. I shook my head gently. No. He didn't question it. Understood, he said, making a note. Second, he continued, well, update your will. Completely. I felt a slight tightening in my chest. My will? Yes, right now, based on what you've told me, there's a high likelihood your daughter believes she will inherit what remains of your estate. I felt a slight tightening in my chest. My will? Yes, right now, based on what you've told me, there's a high likelihood your daughter believes she will inherit what remains of your estate. I gave a small, almost humorless smile. She does. Then we need to make sure that assumption is no longer accurate. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Just certainty. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. What about the house? I asked after a moment. He paused. That's more complicated, he admitted. We can review the documents in detail. There may be a path to challenge it, but I won't promise anything without seeing everything first. I nodded. I understand, but regardless of that outcome, he added, we can ensure that nothing like this happens again. That mattered more than anything, because I couldn't undo what had already been done, but I could decide what came next. How soon can we start? I asked. A faint smile touched his lips. Immediately. Over the next hour, we went through everything. Accounts, contacts, documents. He asked questions I hadn't even thought to ask myself. Not just about the legal side, but about my intentions. What do you want your legacy to be, Ms. McAllister? He asked at one point. The question caught me off guard. My legacy. Yes. When all of this is said and done, what matters most to you? I sat quietly for a moment. I want to know that what I built, what I worked for, goes to someone who respects it, I said, finally. He nodded. Then we'll make sure it does. By the time I left his office, the sun was already beginning to set. The air outside felt different. Not lighter, not easier, but clearer. Like a path had been drawn where there had only been uncertainty before. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, but this time there were no confusing documents in front of me, no unanswered questions, just a quiet sense of direction. Laura came by the next day. Of course she did, and just like always, she walked in with that same practiced smile. Mom, she said, setting her purse down. I was thinking maybe we could... I met with the lawyer yesterday, I said calmly. She froze. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I saw it. That tiny shift, that moment where her confidence slipped. A lawyer, she repeated. Yes, I said, meeting her eyes. Why I held her gaze for just a second longer than usual. Then I smiled. Just making sure everything is organized. Her own words, given back to her. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke, and in that silence, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but unmistakably. Because for the first time since all of this began, Laura realized something. She wasn't the only one making plans anymore. After that day, Laura didn't come by for almost a week. That alone told me more than anything she could have said. In all the time since everything happened, she had never stayed away that long, not without a reason. She needed to maintain the illusion, needed to keep her presence consistent, controlled, predictable. So, when she disappeared, I knew she was thinking. Or more accurately, they were thinking. Trying to figure out what my meeting with the lawyer meant. Trying to decide how much I knew. Trying to plan their next move. And that gave me exactly what I needed. Time. Time to meet with Michael again. Time to bring him every document I could find. Time to begin putting things in place before Laura realized just how far ahead I had moved. 3 days after our first meeting, I sat across from Michael once more, this time with a neatly organized folder of my own. I found everything I could, I said, sliding it across the desk. He opened it immediately, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Page after page, signature after signature. His expression didn't change much, but I could see the focus sharpen in his eyes. "They were thorough," he said after a moment. "Yes," I replied quietly. "They were." He nodded. "These documents are structured to appear legitimate. The notarization, the formatting, it's all done correctly. So there's nothing I can do?" I asked. He looked up at me. "That's not what I said." There was a slight pause. "Legally challenging this will be difficult," he continued, "but not impossible. The key will be demonstrating your medical condition at the time." "I've requested my records," I said, "from the hospital." "Good," he replied. "That's a start." He set the papers aside and leaned forward slightly. "But more importantly," he added, "we've already secured what matters most moving forward." I nodded. Over the past few days, we had done exactly that. Every remaining account, I had every dollar that still belonged to me, had been moved into a trust under Michael's guidance. Not something complicated or flashy, but something solid, something protected. Something that required my explicit consent and legal verification before anyone else could access it. Even me. It felt strange at first, knowing I had to go through a process to reach my own money. But it also felt safe, because now no one could sit me down at a table, hand me a pen, and quietly take it away. "What about the will?" I asked. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a document. "It's ready." Because now no one could sit me down at a table, hand me a pen, and quietly take it away. "What about the will?" I asked. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a document. "It's ready," he said. I stared at it for a moment before taking it into my hands. This was different. This wasn't something being done to me. This was something I was choosing. "Walk me through it," I said. He did. Carefully, clearly, every clause, every condition, every name. And when we reached the part about beneficiaries, he paused. "As it stands," he said, "your daughter is not included." I swallowed. Not because I didn't expect it, but because hearing it out loud made it real. And instead, I asked, "You've designated the majority of your estate to Sophie Bennett," he said. "My granddaughter, Laura's daughter. She was 12, quiet, thoughtful, always watching more than speaking, something she got from me, I think. She's the only one who never treated me differently," I said softly. Michael nodded. "The trust will ensure that she receives everything when she reaches the appropriate age. Until then, it will be managed independently. Independently, not by Laura, not by Daniel. And the rest," I asked. "A portion will go to the local community health foundation," he said, "as you requested." I gave a small nod. That feels right. He studied me for a moment. Are you certain about all of this? It was a fair question. Because once this was signed, there would be no confusion, no misunderstanding, no going back. Yes, I said. For the first time since all of this began, it was a fair question. Because once this was signed, there would be no confusion, no misunderstanding, no going back. Yes, I said. For the first time since all of this began, I didn't hesitate. He slid the document toward me and placed a pen beside it. Then, whenever you're ready. I looked down at the page, at my name, at the decisions laid out in black and white. And then I signed. Not like before, not confused, not pressured, not trusting someone else's explanation. This time I understood every word, every consequence, every boundary I was drawing. When I finished, I set the pen down slowly. It's done, I said. Michael nodded once. Yes, he said. It is. As I left his office that day, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not exactly. More like alignment. For the first time, everything made sense. The past, the present, and what was coming next. Because Laura still didn't know. She still believed this was a small adjustment, a minor disruption, something she could fix if she just said the right thing or waited long enough. She didn't know the truth. Not yet. But she would, because the way Michael had structured everything, the way the documents were filed, the way the notifications would eventually be triggered, there would come a moment when everything became clear to her. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once. And when that moment came, there would be no arguing, no explaining, no rewriting the story to make herself feel better. Just facts, just truth, just consequences. 2 days later, Laura showed up again, right on schedule, Sunday, 2:15 p.m., like nothing had changed. But I saw it the moment she stepped out of her car. The tension, the forced calm. She walked up to the door, knocked once, and waited. I opened it. Hi, Mom, she said, smiling. Hello, Laura. She stepped inside, glancing around the room as if searching for something invisible. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded. Of course. We sat down at the table again. The same table, the same chairs. But this time, everything felt different. I've been thinking, she began carefully, about what you said about the lawyer. I stayed quiet. I just want to understand, she continued. Is there something wrong? Did I do something to make you feel like you needed outside help? There it was, not an apology, a question, a calculation. I looked at her for a long moment. You didn't make me feel that way, I said calmly. Then why? I made the decision, I interrupted gently. She blinked. Why? I held her gaze. Because I wanted to. The answer was simple. Too simple. And that's what unsettled her. She shifted slightly in her chair. That's not really an explanation, Mom. No, I agreed. It's not. Silence settled between us. Heavy, unavoidable. And for the first time since everything began, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not confidence, not control, but uncertainty, because she could feel it now. Something had changed. Something she didn't understand. Something she couldn't predict. And that scared her. But she still didn't know how much. She still didn't know that the next move wasn't hers anymore. The shift in Laura didn't happen all at once. It came in small cracks. Subtle changes that would have gone unnoticed if I hadn't already learned how to see her differently. At first, it was just the questions. More frequent, more direct, less careful. Did the lawyer say anything specific, she asked the next time she came over, trying to sound casual as she set her purse down. I poured tea into 2 cups before answering. He said a lot of things, I replied evenly. She let out a small laugh, but it didn't quite land. I mean, about your situation. My situation, I repeated, handing her a cup. She hesitated. You know, your finances, the house. Everything. Everything. That word again. I sat across from her, watching her carefully. He said I should make sure everything is protected, I said. There was a flicker in her eyes. Protected from what, she asked quickly. I held her gaze. From mistakes. Silence. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke, and then she smiled. Oh, well, that makes sense, she said lightly. That's exactly what Daniel and I have been trying to do. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke, and then she smiled. Oh, well, that makes sense, she said lightly. That's exactly what Daniel and I have been trying to do. Of course. It always came back to that. Protection. I nodded as if I agreed. I know. But inside, something had already shifted, because I could see it now. She wasn't as confident as she used to be, not completely. There was a tension beneath her words, a need to confirm, to understand what I knew without asking directly. And that told me something important. She was starting to worry. Over the next few days, it became more obvious. She called more often, stopped by without notice, even brought Daniel, once a rare occurrence since I had made it clear without saying it directly that he wasn't welcome. Mrs. McAllister? He said, standing stiffly in my doorway, forcing a polite smile. Daniel, I replied calmly. We sat in the living room that day instead of the kitchen. A small change, but it mattered. Because the kitchen had always been my space. The place where I observed, where I listened, where I stayed in control. The living room felt more neutral, more exposed, and I could tell that was intentional. We just wanted to check in, Laura said, sitting beside him. Check in, I asked. About everything, she added quickly, after what you said about the lawyer. There it was again, always circling back to that. I told you, I said, keeping my tone steady. I just wanted to get things organized. Daniel leaned forward slightly. With all due respect, he said, his voice measured. We've already handled most of that. Bringing in an outside party could complicate things. Complicate? I almost smiled. Complicated for who? I asked. He paused. Just in general, he said. In general, I repeated. Laura shifted beside him. Mom, we're just trying to help, she said. We've been handling everything for months now. Handling. Another word. Another quiet claim. I didn't realize I needed that much help, I said. Her expression tightened. You were sick, she replied quickly. You needed support. I needed support, I agreed. Not replacement. The word landed heavier than I expected. Replacement, because that's what they had done. They hadn't helped me manage my life. They had stepped in and taken it. Daniel cleared his throat. No one is replacing you, he said. We're just making sure things run smoothly. Smoothly. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The way he held himself. The way he spoke. The way he avoided direct answers while still trying to sound reasonable. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't impulsive. He was strategic. and that made him dangerous. "I appreciate your concern," I said calmly, "but I'm capable of making my own decisions." Laura's patience began to slip. "I'm not saying you're not," she said, her voice slightly sharper now. "I just don't understand why you suddenly don't trust us." There it was, not an apology, a shift, turning it back on me. I let a small silence settle before answering. "Trust isn't something that disappears suddenly," I said quietly. She froze. "Then what is it?" she asked. I held her gaze. "It's something that changes when you see things more clearly." Another silence, this one heavier, because she understood what I meant, even if she didn't want to admit it. Daniel stood up first. "Well," he said, straightening his jacket, "we don't want to overstep." This one heavier, because she understood what I meant, even if she didn't want to admit it. Daniel stood up first. "Well," he said, straightening his jacket, "we don't want to overstep." Overstep. The word almost made me laugh, but I didn't. "Of course not," I replied. Laura stood more slowly. "Mom," she said, her voice softer again. "We're on the same side here. The same side." I looked at her for a long moment, and for just a second I saw it. Not the manipulation, not the calculation, but something else. Something closer to fear. Because she could feel it now. The distance, the shift, the fact that things were no longer moving in a direction she controlled. "I hope so," I said quietly. She searched my face as if trying to find something she could hold on to. Something familiar. Something reassuring. But I didn't give it to her. Because the truth is, we weren't on the same side anymore. Not really. They left shortly after that. And this time, when the door closed behind them, I didn't feel that heavy silence I used to. I felt something else. Momentum. Because everything was moving now. Slowly. Carefully. But forward. 2 days later, I received a call from Michael. "Miss McAllister," he said, his tone as steady as always. "There's been some activity." My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "What kind of activity?" "Your daughter contacted one of your financial institutions," he said. "She attempted to make changes to an account." I closed my eyes briefly. "And?" "She was denied," he replied. "The account is now fully protected under the trust. She has no authority." A small, quiet exhale left my chest. "She didn't like that," he added. "I imagine not." There was a pause. "This is where things may escalate," he said. "She knows something has changed. She just doesn't know what." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I understand. Be prepared," he continued. "People who lose control often react unpredictably." Unpredictably, yes. That sounded right, because Laura had spent months, maybe longer, believing she was in control. Believing everything was already hers. And now, for the first time, that control was slipping, and she could feel it, even if she didn't fully understand why. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the fading light casting long shadows across the walls. I thought about everything that had happened, everything that was happening, and everything that was about to, because this was just the beginning, the first crack, the first moment where her version of reality no longer matched the truth. And soon, that truth would catch up to her completely, not through arguments, not through accusations, but through something far more powerful. Consequences. The letter wasn't something I wrote in one sitting. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't emotional in the way people expect things like that to be. It took time, careful thought, and more than anything, honesty. The kind of honesty you don't speak out loud. The kind you only write when you know there will be no interruption, no argument, no one trying to twist your words into something more convenient. I started it the night after Michael finalized everything. The house was quiet, too quiet sometimes. But that night, the silence felt necessary. I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Not a laptop, not a typed document, just paper and a pen. Because some things deserve to be written by hand. Every word, every pause, every truth. I stared at the page for a long time before I began. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew once I started, there would be no going back. The first line came slowly. Laura. I stopped there for a moment. Just her name. Simple, familiar, and yet heavier than it had ever felt before. I took a breath and continued. I know you believe I forgave you. The words looked almost calm on the page, but I could feel everything behind them. Years of silence, years of pretending, years of letting her believe something that was never true. I kept writing. I understand why you think that. I didn't fight you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't take you to court. I paused, the pen hovering just above the paper. Because this part mattered. This part was the truth she had avoided for so long. But silence is not forgiveness. I underlined the last word without even realizing I was doing it. Not out of anger, but out of certainty. Because that was the line everything hinged on. That was the difference between what she believed and what was real. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes move over the words I had written so far. There was no bitterness in them, no shouting, no accusations, just facts, just clarity. And that's what made them powerful. I continued. I was sick when you asked me to sign those papers. You knew that. You saw it. You understood exactly how vulnerable I was. My hand tightened slightly around the pen. You didn't just take control of my home. You took advantage of a moment when I trusted you the most. I stopped again, because that sentence was the one that hurt the most. Not the loss of the house, not the money, but the trust. The way she had looked at me that day, smiling, reassuring, guiding my hand, like she was helping me, when she was really taking something from me. I closed my eyes briefly, then continued writing. I don't think you see it that way. I think you've convinced yourself that what you did was necessary, that you were protecting me, that you were helping. I shook my head slightly as I wrote, but help doesn't feel like betrayal. That line stayed with me for a long moment, because it was simple, undeniable, impossible to explain away. The clock on the wall ticked softly as I kept going. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to lose you completely. That was the truth she would never expect, that my silence hadn't been weakness. It had been hope. Hope that she might realize what she had done. Hope that she might come back to me not as someone trying to control my life, but as my daughter again. But over time, I realized something. I slowed down here. Careful. Intentional. You didn't change. The words felt heavier now. Not sharp. Not cruel. Just final. You came into my home week after week talking about the future like nothing had happened. Like everything you had taken was already yours. I set the pen down for a moment, rubbing my fingers together as if they needed a break. Because this part wasn't easy. But it was necessary. I picked the pen back up. So I made a decision. There it was. The turning point. Not hers. Mine. I decided that if you could take from me without asking, then I could choose what to give without explaining. I read that line twice. It felt right. Balanced. Fair. Not revenge. Not punishment. I decided that if you could take from me without asking, then I could choose what to give without explaining. I read that line twice. It felt right, balanced, fair. Not revenge, not punishment, just consequence. I continued, writing, my hand steadier now. By the time you read this, everything will already be in place. I didn't go into details. I didn't list accounts or legal terms. I didn't need to, because she would find out, in her own way, in her own time. And that would be more powerful than anything I could write. What you expected to receive will not be yours. I let that sentence sit alone on the page. Clear, uncomplicated, impossible to misunderstand. I took a breath before writing the next part. This isn't about punishing you, because it wasn't. Not really. It's about protecting what's left of me. That was the truth. The simplest version of it, because after everything she had taken, there was still something left. My voice, my choice, my boundaries, and I wasn't going to lose those too. I finished the letter slowly. No rush, no hesitation. Letter slowly, no rush, no hesitation. Just one final thought. I hope one day you understand the difference between being given something and taking it. I signed my name at the bottom. Mom. Not Rose, not McAllister. Just Mom. Because no matter what she had done, one final thought. I hope one day you understand the difference between being given something and taking it. I signed my name at the bottom. Mom. Not Rose, not McAllister. Just Mom. Because no matter what she had done, that part of me hadn't changed. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, not sealing it yet, not sending it. Because timing mattered. Everything about this needed to happen at the right moment. Not too early, not too late. Just when she was certain that she had already won. The next morning, I brought it to Michael. He read it silently, his expression as steady as always. When he finished, he looked up at me. "This will be difficult for her to hear," he said. "Yes," I replied. "But it's clear," he added. "That's the point." He nodded once. "I'll make sure it reaches her at the appropriate time." Appropriate time. I liked the sound of that, because Laura wasn't ready for it yet. Not fully. She still thought this was something she could manage, something she could fix, something she could talk her way through. But soon, that would change, because when she finally received that letter, it wouldn't just be words on a page. It would be the moment everything she believed collapsed. The moment didn't come with a warning. There was no dramatic buildup. No phone call telling me what was about to happen. No sudden knock on the door. It came quietly, just like everything else. 3 days after I finished the letter, Michael called again. "It's time," he said. I didn't need to ask what he meant. The way he said it, calm, precise, told me everything. "She's been notified," he continued. Indirectly, I sat down slowly at the kitchen table, my hand resting against the edge for support. How I asked. "One of the financial institutions flagged the changes again," he explained. "She pushed harder this time, requested documentation, demanded clarification." That sounded like Laura. "And she was informed that she has no authority," he said, "on any of your remaining accounts." A small pause. "And that those accounts are now part of a protected trust structure." I closed my eyes briefly. "She knows," I whispered. "She knows something," he corrected gently. "Not everything. Not yet. Not yet." That part mattered, because confusion would come first. Then fear. Then the realization. "What about the letter?" I asked. "It will reach her today," he said. delivered through official channels. Not by me, not by hand, not in a moment she could control. That was intentional. Because this wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. That afternoon, I didn't leave the house. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't even try to distract myself. I just sat, waiting. Not for her to come, but for the moment I knew was already unfolding somewhere else. Laura's world shifting beneath her. I imagined it, the way she would react. First, disbelief. She would call the bank, demand to speak to someone higher up, insist there had been a mistake, then frustration, when no one gave her the answers she wanted, and then the beginning of understanding. Because Laura was many things, but she wasn't stupid. She would connect the pieces, the lawyer, the trust, the sudden lack of access, and then the letter, the truth. It was just after 5 p.m. when my phone rang. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. "Hello, Mom." Her voice, tight, controlled, but underneath it, something else. "What is going on?" she asked. No greeting, no pretense, just the question. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "What do you mean, don't do that?" she snapped. "I just got off the phone with the bank. They said I don't have access anymore. They said everything is locked under some kind of trust." Silence. I let her words hang there. "I need you to explain this," she continued. "Now, explain. That word again. The expectation, the assumption that I owed her clarity, that I would sit down and walk her through everything like she had done to me. "I made some changes," I said calmly. What kind of changes, she demanded. What kind of changes she demanded? The kind I needed to make. "That's not an answer." Her voice rose, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the crack beneath her control. I took a slow breath. "You received something today," I said. A pause, and then the kind I needed to make. "That's not an answer." Her voice rose, not dramatically, but enough to reveal the crack beneath her control. I took a slow breath. "You received something today?" I said. A pause, and then silence, longer this time, because she knew. "You mean the letter?" she said finally. Her voice had changed, quieter, more careful. "Yes." Another pause. "I haven't read it yet," she admitted. That surprised me. "Why not? I wanted to talk to you first." Of course she did, because talking meant control. Talking meant negotiation. Talking meant she could shape the narrative before facing the truth. "You should read it," I said. "Mom read it," I repeated gently. Silence again. This time, heavier. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice softer now. "I thought we were okay." There it was, the lie she had been telling herself, the version of reality she had built. "We were never okay," I said quietly. The words didn't come out harsh. They didn't need to. Because the truth doesn't need volume to hurt. She inhaled sharply. "That's not fair," she said. "Isn't it?" Another pause. "I've been here," she continued. "I've helped you. I've taken care of things when you couldn't. You took control." I interrupted. The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, unavoidable. "That's not the same thing," she said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. "It felt the same to me," I replied. Her breathing shifted slightly on the other end of the line. Faster, less controlled. "Mom, please," she said. "Just tell me what's going on." I looked down at my hands. Steady, calm, stronger than they had been in a long time. "I already did," I said. "When?" "In the letter." Another silence. This one different, because now she understood. Not everything, but enough. "You really did this," she said slowly. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. "I really finished what you started. That landed. I could feel it, even through the silence." "I didn't start anything," she said, but her voice was weaker now. "Yes," I said quietly. "You did." She didn't respond. Not immediately, because somewhere in that moment, she was remembering the papers, the signatures, the way she had smiled, the way she had convinced herself it was all necessary. "Read the letter, Laura," I said. My voice wasn't angry, wasn't cold, just final. "And then we can talk." I ended the call before she could respond. Not out of cruelty, but because this part wasn't meant to be a conversation. It was meant to be understood on her own. That night, I sat by the window as the sky darkened. Somewhere across town, Laura was reading that letter, line by line, word by word, and with each sentence the version word, and with each sentence the version of me she had created in her mind was disappearing, replaced by something she didn't expect, something she didn't plan for, something she couldn't control. The truth. Laura didn't call me again that night, and somehow of me she had created in her mind was disappearing, replaced by something she didn't expect, something she didn't plan for, something she couldn't control. The truth. Laura didn't call me again that night, and somehow that told me everything. Because Laura had always been someone who filled silence. She explained, justified, corrected anything to avoid sitting with something uncomfortable for too long. But this time, she went quiet. And that meant she was reading, really reading. Not skimming, not dismissing, not looking for ways to argue, but reading each line and realizing she couldn't rewrite any of it. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house felt different, still quiet, but no longer heavy. There's a difference between silence that feels empty and silence that feels resolved. I made my coffee and sat by the window, watching the street slowly come to life. Cars passing, neighbors walking their dogs, ordinary things. But inside me, nothing felt ordinary anymore, because I knew something had shifted, not just for me, for her. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Laura. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hello?" She didn't speak immediately. I could hear her breathing, uneven, like she had been crying or trying not to. "I read it," she said finally. Her voice was different, not sharp, not defensive, just raw. "I know," I replied. A long pause followed. I didn't realize she began, then stopped. Didn't realize. I waited. "I didn't realize that's how you felt," she said. There it was, the first real crack. Not an excuse, not a justification, just a statement. And yet, even that wasn't enough. "Did you think I felt something else?" I asked gently. Another silence. "I thought—" She hesitated. "I thought you understood." Understood. That word sat between us. Heavy. "What did you think I understood?" I asked. "That you needed help," she said quickly. "That things were getting harder for you. That someone had to step in. Someone had to step in. I closed my eyes briefly. And that someone was you, I said. Yes, no hesitation that time, because in her mind, it had always been that simple. I trusted you, I said quietly. Her breath caught. I know. No, I continued softly. You knew I trusted you. That's different. Silence again. Because that was the truth she couldn't soften. You make it sound like I planned this, she said after a moment, her voice tightening slightly. I leaned back in my chair. Didn't you? I was trying to help you. The defensiveness was back now. Not as strong as before, but there. Because she was fighting. Not me, but the version of herself she had to protect. Laura, I said calmly, help doesn't require secrecy. That's not fair. Help doesn't happen when someone is too weak to say no, I added. She inhaled sharply. I never forced you. No, I agreed. You didn't have to. That landed. I could feel it, even through the phone. Because now, she was remembering it differently, not as a clean, logical decision, but as something more complicated, more uncomfortable. I thought she said slowly, I thought I was doing what needed to be done. I believe you, I said. That surprised her. I could hear it in the pause that followed. You do? Yes. Because I did. I didn't think she had woken up one morning and decided to hurt me. But intention doesn't erase impact. And that's why this matters, I continued. Because what you believed and what you did aren't the same thing. Another long silence. This one is heavier than the others. Because now she wasn't arguing. She was listening. And the trust, she asked quietly. What about it? Is it completely gone? That question lingered, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood what she was really asking. Is there a way back? I took a slow breath. Trust doesn't disappear all at once, I said. It changes, piece by piece. And now I paused, choosing my words carefully. It's not something I can give you just because you want it. She didn't respond, because she knew. Trust was no longer hers to expect. What about everything else, she asked after a moment? The trust, the accounts, the will, there it was. Not the emotional question, the practical one. What about them? I asked. You really took everything away from me, she said. I almost smiled, because that's how she saw it, taken away. Not never hers to begin with. I didn't take anything from you, I said calmly. Yes, you did, she snapped. You changed everything without telling me. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I spoke. I made decisions about my life without asking for your permission. Her breathing grew heavier. That's not the same thing. It is to me, because for the first time I had done exactly what she had done. Made a decision, acted on it, and informed her after. The difference was I had done it with full understanding, with clarity, with intention, not from a place of control, but from a place of reclaiming it. What about Sophie? She asked suddenly. My granddaughter. Her voice softened when she said the name. She's part of this now, isn't she? Yes. A pause. Why her? That question mattered. Because this was the part she wouldn't be able to explain away. Because she never treated me like I was something to manage, I said. Silence. Because she listens, I added, even when she doesn't understand everything. Another pause. And because she never made me feel like I was in the way. That one stayed. Because it wasn't about money, or inheritance, or control. It was about something much simpler. Respect. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, Laura said quietly. I know. And I did. But again, that didn't change what had happened. What happens now? She asked. There it was, the question that mattered most. Not about the past, but the future. We move forward, I said. How? Differently. She waited. Without assumptions, I continued. Without control. Without pretending things are okay when they're not. And us? She asked. I looked out the window. The world outside was still moving, unchanged. But inside, everything had shifted. Well, see, I said. Not cold, not cruel, just honest. Because healing doesn't happen in a moment. And it doesn't happen just because someone finally understands. It takes time. It takes consistency. And most of all, it takes truth. And for the first time, we were finally standing in it. Laura came to see me the next day. Not at 2:15. Not on schedule. Not with flowers. She arrived just before noon, her car pulling into the driveway faster than usual. I was already in the kitchen when I heard the door open. She didn't knock this time. Mom! Her voice echoed through the house. I'm here, I said. She walked in quickly, stopping just inside the doorway. I turned to face her, and for a moment neither of us spoke. She looked different, not physically, but something in her had shifted. The confidence was gone. The calm, rehearsed composure she had carried for months replaced by something more fragile, more real. I rate it, she said again, even though we both knew she had. I nodded. I figured you had. She stepped closer, her hands slightly trembling. Why didn't you ever tell me? She asked. There it was. The question she had been building toward. Not about the trust, not about the money, but about the silence. Would you have listened? I asked gently. She opened her mouth, then stopped. Because she knew. Back then, she wouldn't have. I thought you were okay, she said instead. I know. You acted like everything was normal. I acted like I didn't want to lose you, I corrected. That landed harder than anything else I had said so far. Her eyes filled slightly, but she didn't look away. I didn't realize, she whispered. Away. I didn't realize, she whispered. You've said that, I replied softly. She nodded, swallowing. I thought time would fix it, she said. Time. That quiet belief that if you wait long enough, you've said that, I replied softly. She nodded, swallowing. I thought time would fix it, she said. Time. That quiet belief that if you wait long enough, things disappear. Time doesn't fix things that are never acknowledged, I said. Silence settled between us. Not tense, not explosive, just honest, for the first time in a long time. I was scared, she admitted suddenly. That surprised me. Of what? Of losing everything, she said. Of something happening to you and everything becoming complicated. Legal issues, disputes, uncertainty. She shook her head slightly. Daniel said we needed to act before it was too late. Daniel. Of course, and you agreed, I said. She hesitated. I thought it made sense, she said quietly. There it was again. Logic. Justification. A way to make something feel reasonable even when it wasn't right. And what about me? I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine. What about how it would affect me? I didn't think a way to make something feel reasonable even when it wasn't right. And what about me? I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine. What about how it would affect me? I didn't think. I know. I interrupted gently. That was the problem. She hadn't thought about me. Not really. Not in that moment. She had thought about outcomes, about control, about avoiding risk, but not about the person sitting in front of her. I thought I was protecting you, she said again, weaker this time. And I felt like you were taking something from me, I replied. We stood there facing each other. Two truths, both real, both incompatible. And for the first time, she wasn't trying to argue. She wasn't trying to explain it away. She was just hearing it. What happens now? She asked again. The same question as before. But this time it sounded different. Less like a demand, more like a plea. I walked over to the table and sat down slowly. After a moment, she did the same. We sat across from each other just like we always had. But this time, there was no pretending. That depends on you, I said. Her brows furrowed slightly. What do you mean? I mean, this doesn't go back to how it was, I said. Not just because you want it to. She nodded slowly. I understand that. Do you? She met my eyes. I think I'm starting to. That was honest, not perfect, but honest. And Daniel? I asked. Her expression shifted again, tighter, more complicated. What about him? Does he understand? She looked down at her hands. No, she admitted. He thinks you're overreacting. I let out a quiet breath. Of course he does. He says you're being influenced, she added, that the lawyer is turning you against us. I almost smiled, because that was predictable. When control starts slipping, people look for someone else to blame. I'm not being influenced, I said calmly. I'm making decisions. I know, she said quickly. I told him that. That surprised me. You did? She nodded. I told him this wasn't about the lawyer, that this was about what we did. What we did. Not what happened. Not what went wrong. What we did. That mattered. And how did he respond? I asked. She hesitated. He didn't like it. Of course he didn't, because admitting fault changes everything. I don't know what's going to happen with him, she added quietly. I studied her face for a moment. There was something there now. Something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. Not about money, not about control, but about her life. Her choices. The path she had taken. I can't fix that for you, I said gently. I know. Another silence. But this one wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. I want to make this right, she said after a moment. There it was, the sentence I had been waiting for. Not perfectly said, not fully formed, but real. You can't undo what happened, I replied. I know, but you can decide who you are moving forward. She nodded slowly. I want to be better than this, she said. Better than this. Not better for me. Not better for the outcome, but better as a person. That was different, and I could feel it. Not fully, not completely, but enough. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, she added. Good, I said, because I won't. She gave a small, sad smile. I didn't think you would. We sat there for a long moment. No arguments, no raised voices, just truth. Uncomfortable, unfinished, but real. I don't expect anything from you, I said finally. Not apologies, not explanations, not promises. She looked up. Then what do you expect? I met her gaze. Consistency. She nodded. I can do that. Well, see. And that was enough. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a beginning, a fragile one, but real. Because for the first time, we weren't pretending anymore. The days after that conversation were quieter than I expected. Not because everything was resolved, but because, for the first time, there was nothing left to pretend. Laura didn't come by the next Sunday, or the one after that. At first, I wondered if I should be concerned, but then I realized this was the first time she wasn't showing up out of habit or control or obligation. She was staying away because she didn't know how to come back. And that mattered, because space, real space, is something most people don't know how to give, especially when they're used to having access. Instead, she called. Not often, not casually, just occasionally. Short conversations, careful words, no assumptions, no discussions about money, no mentions of the house. And for the first time in a long time, she listened more than she spoke. About 3 weeks later, she came to see me again. It wasn't planned. There was no message beforehand. I just heard her car pull into the driveway slower this time, more deliberate. I walked to the door and opened it before she could knock. She stood there, looking unsure. Not like before. Not confident. Not rehearsed. Just uncertain. Hi, she said softly. Hi, I replied. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. Come in. She walked in slowly, her eyes moving around the house as if seeing it differently now. Not as something she controlled, but as something she no longer understood. We sat in the living room, not the kitchen. That was my choice this time, because this wasn't about observation anymore. This was about facing each other. I've been thinking, she said after a moment. I nodded. So have I. She let out a small breath. I ended things with Daniel. That caught me off guard. Not because I didn't expect problems, but because I didn't expect her to act so quickly. You did? I asked. She nodded. He doesn't think he did anything wrong, she said. He still believes this is all your fault. Still believes this is all your fault, that you're being manipulated. I didn't respond. He wanted me to push back harder, she continued, to fight you, to challenge everything legally. That sounded like him. And D, you didn't. It wasn't a question. No, that you're being manipulated. I didn't respond. He wanted me to push back harder, she continued, to fight you, to challenge everything legally. That sounded like him. And you didn't. It wasn't a question. No, she said, because I read your letter again. That mattered. Not just reading it once, but going back to it, letting it settle. I realized something she added. I waited. I never actually asked you what you wanted, she said. There it was. Simple, but powerful. Not really, I replied. I assumed, she said. Yes, I justified it. Yes. And I kept doing it even after you made it clear something wasn't right. I nodded slowly. That's true. She looked down at her hands. I don't like who I was in that situation, she said quietly. That sentence was different, because it wasn't about me. It was about her reflection, her understanding. That's a good place to start, I said. She looked up. Change doesn't happen because someone tells you you're wrong, I said. It happens when you don't recognize yourself anymore. She absorbed that. Quietly. And Sophie? She asked after a moment. My granddaughter. She asked me about you, she said. She said you seemed different. I smiled faintly. Did you tell her why I told her the truth? She said. That surprised me. What truth? That I made a mistake, she said simply. No excuses. No explanation. Just that. I nodded. She's old enough to understand that, I said. She's more perceptive than I gave her credit for, Laura admitted. Yes, I said softly. She is. We sat in silence for a moment, but this silence wasn't heavy. It was steady. What happens now? She asked again. That question kept coming back, not because she didn't understand, but because she was trying to find her place in something that had changed. I told you before, I said. We move forward. Differently. Yes. She nodded. And the trust it stays as it is. No hesitation. No room for negotiation. She accepted that. I figured, she said. And Sophie, she asked. Shall be taken care of, I said. And me. That question was softer, more vulnerable. I met her gaze. You'll take care of yourself. She swallowed. I don't expect anything, she said quickly. I wanted to know where I stand. That was fair. And for the first time, it felt like a genuine question. You stand where you choose to stand, I said. She frowned slightly. I don't understand. You don't get to undo what happened, I explained. But you do get to decide who you are now. She let that settle. And if I choose to be better, then you show it, I said. How? Not with words, I replied. With time. That was the part people don't like. Time. Because it can't be rushed, can't be negotiated, can't be controlled. I can do that, she said quietly. Well, see, not harsh, not dismissive, just real. She nodded. I understand. We sat there a while longer, talking about small things, normal things. But this time, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, without assumptions, without expectations. Just one moment at a time. When she stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. Mom, she said. Yes. I'm glad you wrote that letter. I looked at her. Are you? She nodded. Because I would have kept believing everything was okay, when it wasn't even everything was okay when it wasn't. That was true, and that was the point. Sometimes the truth hurts, I said. She gave a small, sad smile. But it also fixes things, she replied. I didn't correct her, because the truth doesn't fix everything, but it does. Give you a chance, and sometimes that's enough. Time didn't fix everything. I don't think it ever does. But it revealed things. Quietly, steadily. And over the next few months, that's exactly what happened between Laura and me. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic apologies that erased the past, no moment where everything suddenly felt normal again. Instead, there were small changes, the kind that don't look impressive from the outside, but matter more than anything else. She started calling less, but listening more. When she visited, she didn't bring folders or suggestions or plans. She brought herself. No expectations. She brought herself. No expectations. No hidden agenda. Just presence. And that was new. The first time she came back on a Sunday, she knocked. She actually stood there and waited. I opened the door, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Hi, she said. Hi. No hidden agenda, just presence. And that was new. The first time she came back on a Sunday, she knocked. She actually stood there and waited. I opened the door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. Hi, she said. Hi. No performance, no pretending. Just two people figuring something out. We sat in the kitchen again that day. The same table, the same chairs. But it didn't feel like before. Because this time, there was no illusion between us. She didn't talk about the house. She didn't mention the trust. She didn't ask about anything that wasn't hers to ask about anymore. Instead, she told me about Sophie, about school, about the little things. And when I spoke, she listened. Really listened. Not waiting for her turn. Not trying to steer the conversation. Just hearing me. And I noticed it. Of course I did. Because when something has been missing for so long, you feel it the moment it returns. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Because this wasn't about one visit or one conversation. It was about consistency. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, the space between us began to change. Not disappear, not fully close, but soften, like something that had been broken. Was learning how to exist again, differently. One afternoon, Sophie came with her. That was the first time since everything happened. She walked into the house with that same quiet curiosity she had always had, her eyes moving around as if she were taking everything in. "Grandma?" she said, smiling. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, pulling her into a gentle hug. She held on just a second longer than usual, and I felt it, that connection, uncomplicated, unconditional. "Mom said you've been busy," she said. I glanced at Laura briefly before answering. "I've been taking care of things." Sophie nodded, like that made perfect sense. "Good," she said. "You always take care of things." I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." Laura watched us quietly from across the room, and for the first time, there was no tension in her expression, just something softer, something closer to understanding. Later that day, after Sophie had gone outside to play, Laura and I sat alone again. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me. "Which part?" "About consistency." I nodded. "And?" I asked. She took a breath. "I realized I used to think saying the right thing was enough." I waited. "But it's not," she continued. "It's what you do over time." "Yes," I said. She looked at me. "I'm trying. I can see that." Those words surprised her. "You can?" "Yes, because I could. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to know that something had shifted, something real. I don't expect things to go back to how they were," she said. "Good. I want to be someone you can trust again." I held her gaze. "That's not something you ask for," I said. "It's something you earn." She nodded. "I know." And this time, I believed her. Not because of what she said, but because of how she had been showing up, consistently, without pushing, without assuming, without trying to take control of something that wasn't hers anymore. "I'm not angry anymore," I said after a moment. Her eyes widened slightly. "You're not." "No." That part was true. The anger had faded. Not because it didn't matter, but because I had already done what I needed to do. I had protected myself. I had drawn the line. I had told the truth. And after that, there was nothing left to fight. But I remember, I added. She nodded slowly. I understand, and I think she did. Because remembering doesn't mean holding on to pain. It means recognizing what happened and choosing not to let it happen again. That's the difference. That's the boundary. And she respected it. That evening, after they left, I stood by the window again. The same place I had stood months earlier, watching the same street, the same quiet world moving on. But this time, everything felt different. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. No illusions. No false forgiveness. No pretending that time alone could fix something that required truth. I thought about the letter, the words I had written, the moment Laura read them, and everything changed. It wasn't easy. It wasn't gentle. But it was necessary. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop pretending you already have. And for the first time in a long time, that's exactly what we were doing. Moving forward, not back, not around, but forward. Together. Carefully, honestly, and on my terms. What this story taught me is something many people learn too late. Forgiveness is not the same as silence, and love does not mean surrendering your boundaries. We are often told that family should come first no matter what. But what we are not told is that even family can cross lines that should never be crossed. And when that happens, choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. There is a quiet strength in truth, not the kind that shouts or demands, but the kind that stands still and refuses to bend. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to take anything back by force. What I needed was clarity about what was done, about how it affected me, and about what I would allow moving forward. And once I found that clarity, everything else followed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop pretending. Stop pretending you're okay. Stop pretending someone didn't hurt you. Stop pretending that time alone can fix what honesty never addressed. Because healing doesn't begin with time. It begins with truth. But here's the part that matters most. People can change. Not because you demand it, and not because they feel guilty, but because they finally see themselves clearly. And when that happens, you have a choice. Not to forget, not to erase the past, but to decide whether there is room for something new to grow in its place. In the end, this wasn't just about loss or betrayal. It was about reclaiming my voice, my choices, and my peace. And sometimes that's the real victory. Not getting everything back, but knowing no one can take anything from you again. If this story touched you in any way, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe in stories about truth, strength, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these journeys together.